Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. I'm your host, Lasheena Williams, and so excited to be back here talking about the topic of navigating leadership and board development within your nonprofit organization. And I'm so excited to have Dr. Angela White-Jones back with us to further the conversation this month around this topic. Hello, hello.
Hello,
How are you?
hello, Lasheena. I'm doing very well. Hello, everybody.
Good. So good to have you back. It's always a good time to have you on the show. Before we get started, if you don't mind just sharing a little for those who may be tuning in for the first time, a little bit about yourself and how you enter the nonprofit arena.
Sure. So, my name is Dr. Angela White-Jones. I'm currently an associate lecturer with the School of Public Administration at the University of Central Florida, and I'm also the program director of the Masters of Nonprofit Management program at UCF as well. I have been working in nonprofit or with nonprofit organizations for now, we're looking at like 20 years now
Mm.
in my career. Crazy to say that. Um, I have worked in essentially all sectors. I have been a consultant for nonprofits. I have worked in the nonprofit industry, particularly in social services, arts. The social services and the arts field, especially. I have worked with government and in government agencies, and I moved from nonprofit work directly into academia a few years after I received my doctorate. So I've seen it all, it seems like, done just about everything. And if I haven't, I know someone who has, and I've
Mhm.
talked to other people who have. So it's been quite a journey over the last 2 decades with this career.
Yay. And hearing you talk about UCF and then also our topic around leadership development
Mhm.
and just professional development as a whole, can you share, and get these questions a lot where organizations are looking for opportunity to develop their skills in leadership in the nonprofit arena. Maybe not necessarily a degree program, but just want to sharpen their tools.
Yes.
Can you share what resources may be available through the University of Central Florida to them?
Yes, absolutely. So, aside from our degree programs and our graduate certificate programs, we also have several programs that people who are interested in developing their skills can do, including our nonprofit professionals certificate, which is done by our our Center for Public and Nonprofit Management, or CPNM program. That is where individuals who are interested in a bit of it's in between an overview and a deep dive. Of course, you get the deep dive when you're
Mhm.
in school, but you can get a nice deep dive and perspective on a variety of different subtopics as it relates to nonprofits and fundraising with the nonprofit professionals program, being able to meet once a month for several months over. We have cohorts throughout the year, but again, the cohorts are smaller, so it feels like you're in a
Mhm.
classroom. It's taught by a university professor or a nonprofit professional as well, and they give you a really great overview of nonprofits and fundraising, and you can receive credentialing once you have completed that as well. So that's a really exciting bonus for people who are interested. We also have capacity building programs for both Orange and Osceola County. So if you are someone
Mhm.
that is working in a nonprofit and you are interested in learning all about the idiosyncrasies of grant writing, but the different areas within it. So it's not even just solely grant writing, but it's also things like board management, volunteer management. How do you strategically show your impact as an organization, so on and so forth. If you are somewhere in that beginner to moderate time frame for and level of knowledge, that is a good program to also perhaps utilize and undertake. Our Orange County and Osceola County capacity building programs, we will start advertising for applicants to join us. They usually occur May of 2025 for Osceola, April, May, and then for Orange, it'll likely be June and July in those timeframes. So if you are someone who has a nonprofit in those areas, we invite you to keep on the lookout for the advertisement for participants in those particular programs as well. And we also have a technical financial program as well, financial assistance program. And that is where financial management, excuse me, that's where
Mm-hmm.
you are going and meeting again with a cohort with instructors from UCF, and they are talking to you explicitly about the financial management side of a nonprofit. So anyone who
Mm-hmm.
feels like they're really hungry for that kind of information, or even if you feel like, that's not really my thing, but I want to know more, I want to learn more, that's a great opportunity for people to come in, study with one of our esteemed professors, and understand how financial management is so critical to your nonprofit in terms of asking for money, whether it's for a grant, for a major gift, for an event, and also how to budget and what do you do with that once you are receiving those particular funds to make sure and ensure that your nonprofit is thriving ethically in all of its financial areas and activities. So we have just a few of those particular programs that are really exciting. And we're always thinking about more as well. We're
Mm-hmm.
always thinking about more partnerships and more ways that we can go out to the community. We have our Nonprofit Partners Conference we do annually. That
Mm-hmm.
just finished in October. But, I always tell people save the date
Yeah.
because it usually occurs in September or early October. So save that time right around then. That's
Mm-hmm.
also an
Mm-hmm.
excellent way to get some information about leadership, board development. We have all kinds of topics there. And what I really love about that conference is that it's coming from a practical perspective as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
not solely academic, but
Mm-hmm.
it's identifying the critical needs that you all have as nonprofit professionals, and you're hearing from other nonprofit professionals and people who have been there in the past. So I really love that opportunity as well.
Awesome. So I think that was a really good kickoff of our conversation when it comes to being able to navigate board development along with just leadership development within a nonprofit organization. So, what are some tips that you have in this month's topic?
Yeah. So leadership and board development. So I actually have come across a couple of areas when you are developing a board, particularly if it's for the first time. And what has been brought up to me
Hmm.
recently has been the question of who should be on your board, and am I allowed to have family members and friends on your
Mm,
board? And so I would like to say that it is best practice that that not occur if you can
hmm.
help it. And I understand that sometimes, especially with family foundations, and so there are exceptions. I will say it's not illegal to have your cousin or your sibling or your parent to work alongside you
Hmm.
in a board capacity, but you have to be, if you're going to go that route, a lot of times of what we see is if it's a family foundation, so obviously a family is going to be the ones that are managing the money, they're going to be looking at what their parameters are and guidelines are for giving money away
Hmm.
and reporting and so on and so forth. And in those instances, that's absolutely fair because generally monies are kept in a family trust. And there is a matriarch, patriarch,
Hmm.
sometimes both, that have set aside money. Sometimes it's after they have passed, sometimes it's not. But depending on the circumstances, monies have been set aside, and the family all have a say. Certain people within the family have a say. those are fine, especially as long as there are parameters involved.
Mhm.
But when you're creating a nonprofit that's not necessarily one that's giving money away or that isn't termed as a family financial or a family foundation, be very careful when
Mhm.
you have family or friends as board members. Set boundaries, set expectations, set
Mhm.
rules. And I think any of us know that working with family can be the best thing ever. And it can quickly turn into the most sour thing ever as well, because sometimes
Mhm.
it's not always easy to tell your family what to do or to tell your friends what to do, especially if you find yourself being, chairman of the board or chairwoman of the
Mhm.
board, or, if you're an executive director or something, and someone else
Mhm.
is taking on the reins somewhere else. It can be very difficult to separate family from
Mhm.
business partner, friend from business partner, and saying, okay, I really need this to happen. I need that to happen, or you're not doing the job that I need you to do here. And so when those things happen, feelings get into it. And it's a lot
Mhm.
easier for that to happen when there are people that you know and that you care about inherently, as opposed to, people who are, you've hired for a specific capacity and
Mhm.
for specific work. So, I say that it's generally not the best practice to have a nonprofit board that strictly has family members. If you do have one, that's fine. But maybe, if you've got 10 slots on your board, maybe there's one additional family member and then
Mhm.
8 other people, so that everyone has an opportunity to have a say, and you don't feel like it's, one person against another person, or you don't feel like people are colluding and that the decisions
Mhm.
always have to be in the hand of this person. That everyone has an equal opportunity to, continue to have those and maintain those boundaries. And
Mhm.
that also makes for ethical decision making in nonprofits as well. So, my advice when people are like, should we have family members or what have you on the board?
Mhm.
It's, if you can help it, probably not. But if not,
Mhm.
then please make sure that there are rules, defined boundaries with how policies, and that those
Mhm.
policies are agreed upon by every single board member, and that there are a majority of people on that board that are not related to you. That's what you
Mhm.
want. You do not want the majority of people
Yep.
related to you if you can help it.
Love that. And I was thinking about when you were talking, I'm like, yes, even with the policies, even with your bylaws, sometimes when you have family members involved and you have to put those policies into effect, that emotional part can still be there. But at least if you have the policies and procedures in place, you can point to that, but
Right.
still there's that factor there versus if it's an outside individual, it's kind of strictly, hey, here's the policies. This is what we set as a board. This is what we agreed upon, and we're just doing what is in accordance to what we as a board developed. So I was
Exactly.
thinking about that. Yeah, like with the family, it's probably still going to be a little something there.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. Yeah. Yep.
Yes. I think also when it comes to board development and leadership, it's
Mm-hmm.
to really look at training and education. There are, like, currently, I am president of an organization. So that's a nonprofit volunteer organization. We also have bylaws and guidelines and rules. But what it's also imperative is to make sure that there is education and training for people, especially if it's their first time on a board. I think there are a lot of people who want to belong to a nonprofit board. And one, when they first get into it, it can be intimidating, because if you are the new one and if it's your first time
Mm-hmm.
being on there, you might feel like, well, I don't know when I have a voice or a say so, or I don't know when I'm supposed to do or what I'm supposed to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
So, having some set aside time as well for your board to be properly trained on, again, what your particular bylaws are, what everyone's role is on the board, what policies and procedures with attendance. That's really
Mhm.
important. There are a lot of grants that are asking for attendance for the board. They want to make sure that their board members are strong, and to be strong is to be present at
Mhm.
meetings, and to really have and show your voice there. So making the those decisions and sharing right off the top, like, this is our expectation for you to be here, and we want you to contribute in this way. Training is
Mhm.
always an excellent thing to have too when you are developing a board. And then and the last thing that I will say that I think is of importance is defining a role for each board member. So
Mhm.
oftentimes we have boards where we get people on there that are really good on paper, and they are excellently trained and educated and all of that
Mhm.
experience, but they may have the same experience as someone who already is on the board. So they get on the board, and now you've got two people that are essentially acting as the same person, or it's the same
Mhm.
entity. And neither of them really know, well, what else am I supposed to do? What am I bringing to the table that
Mhm.
is already not being brought and shown? So you really have to look at, and this is part of the board building process, like, what do you need?
Mhm.
What is the hole that you need on the board? Do you need somebody who is a networker that can go out and connect you with different stakeholders or potential stakeholders and potential
Mhm.
supporters for funding? Do you need somebody who is really well versed? Like, if you're building a building, do you need somebody who's excellent in construction speak? Or do you need an
Mhm.
attorney who's really great at looking at policy and guidelines and rules and so on and so forth? Like, who do you need so that you don't
Mhm.
have, you know, 10 people who are all attorneys, or you don't have
Mhm.
10 people who are all programmatic service providers? Like, you need some, but you don't need them all. You need a really great variety of folks that are going to mesh well. You don't want everybody to be argumentative and all of that are going to take
Mhm.
points from different perspectives, but you also still need different perspectives, and you don't want anyone to feel like, well, if he or she is already doing this, then why am I here? If they're already doing
Mhm.
this, then I don't need to be here. That's when
Right.
you start to also see some drop off, because people don't
Mhm.
feel like they need to be there. And a board member always has to have a reason to be there. You have to show them
Mhm.
what they're going to do, and how they're going to contribute, and what ways they can move your mission along. So, those are some of my key points, the best practices that have come up very often
Mhm.
lately when it comes to board development.
I love it. So I'm just kind of now rewinding back. So you talked about the identifying the gaps, like, so
Mhm.
for within your board first, before you even start doing that outreach. What do you currently need so that you don't have the duplication in board members, and you can really bring in different strengths to help build
Mhm.
your mission. Then from that, something I was also thinking about is how the importance of that onboarding process. What does that look like for that board member? So you identify the gaps, you found these potential board members. Then what? Kind of thing, right? So what does that onboarding process look like? Because that also can set the tone for the organization, and how that board member engages with the organization.
Mhm.
And then another part that you touched on is the orientation part, like being able to orient the board members. Um, what does that look like? Them getting access to the bylaws, you sitting down, going over the organization's mission, and kind of what your core values, what's happening in the organization, and so forth. As you were going, I was kind of just, I'm like organized, in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, all those pieces to
Yes.
onboarding from the very beginning to bring your on board, your board members on board, is so crucial
Mhm.
to equipping them to be successful board members within the board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to have an onboarding process, and you have to
Yep.
know what you need before they come
Yeah.
aboard, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. We're actually going through within on the nonprofit side. We're actually
Mhm.
going through this process now. Where during our board retreat that we talked about our gaps. We've come together. we've identified gaps individually and kind of came together like, hey, this is what our gaps are. Interestingly, the list was a little lengthy. Like, I'm like, for just a few more board members that we're looking to recruit. But we were able to, as a board, talk about what are our priority areas. Now we see these are the gaps. It would be great to have representatives from the legal arena or from these
Mhm.
different arenas based off of where we're going, which essentially came back to, because we just concluded our strategic planning process. It
Mhm.
came back to looking at our strategic plan and where we want to go over the next few years.
Yes,
Which board members can we bring on board to help us in moving the organization ahead? It's kind of how we
absolutely.
prioritize who those board members will be to outreach
Yes.
to. Yeah. And then even within that, we kind of went into the conversation of, just for suggestions for organizations figuring it out. We went into the conversation of, well, how are we going to, what is it? Is it like, hey, Dr. Angela White Jones, I'm just going to shoot you an email, say, hey, you want to join our board? Or what does that
Right.
process looks like? So we went into that conversation of, no, we want to have a conversation.
Exactly.
You don't want to just, make it so informal, because this is a commitment. And on our board, we ask that you sit on the board for at least 3 years. This is a commitment. So
Yeah,
you really want to take the time to get to know who's that board member, make sure that our mission, their personal mission, and the mission of the organization align
exactly.
as well. So, yeah.
Exactly. It's very
Mm-hmm.
critical that you understand who you're going to be working with for the next, and usually, yeah, board term times are 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a little shorter,
Mm-hmm.
usually not longer, but you
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure that you're working with the best people possible that will, again, move your mission forward, and getting those pieces together like a strategic plan, and especially, your already your mission, your vision, bylaws that you have, any articles of incorporation, all of those foundational pieces are what are going to
Mm-hmm.
be the key pieces towards helping you understand where are the gaps located in our board, and what are we looking for. Like, is this also, what kind
Mm-hmm.
of board is this a strategic planning board? Like, maybe you
Mm-hmm.
might be someone, or might be in a position where you're like, I don't even have a strategic plan. So maybe you need a board that's more focused on planning, and maybe you need a
Mm-hmm.
board at a certain time that's more focused on fundraising and on diversified fundraising. Maybe you need a board that is focused on, policy and ethics. Maybe there's been, some
Yep.
things that have happened, and so you need a really tightly ethically sound board that knows about those type of attributes. So you also may find yourself having different boards at different times. And if you do
Mm-hmm.
have a big board too, what I also would suggest doing is splitting some of the work up into task forces or subcommittees. That's also a way that you can keep board members engaged on specific areas of their interest without necessarily having to say goodbye to them in case, like, all right, we've got our strategic plan, but I love this person's mind and spirit and work ethic. I want
Mm-hmm.
to keep them. I don't want to roll them off. So maybe you instead have a strategic planning, task force or subcommittee where they are charged with just making sure that the outcomes are being met. Maybe they're measuring the outcomes annually or biannually, whatever
Mm-hmm.
the time frame is, but they're tasked with making sure that you're actually following the practices within the strategic plan, but you don't have to totally move everything around for that, because you're
Mm-hmm.
not creating one at the time from scratch. And maybe you have a volunteer or mentorship subcommittee or something to that effect, if that is really important. So you can also, if you want to hang on to great talent,
Mm-hmm.
and take the specificity off of the entire board as a whole, you can utilize task forces and subcommittees as a way to get them involved.
I love that. And I love that you talked about defining what type of board that your board is. Especially because I've seen it where especially organizations starting out, the expectation of the board is a working board, but
Mhm.
then when recruiting the board, they're sharing with the board, hey, I want you to join the board, not necessarily specifying it. So board members come in thinking, hey, as long as I'm meeting the meeting requirements and what's in the bylaws, then I'm
Right.
good. But then we
Right.
find that the organization is saying we need more support than that from our board, from a
Right.
working capacity. So
Right.
knowing that up front, yeah, is helpful.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to kind of wrap this all in a bow. So now we talked about that board process. Now, as the leader of the organization, because we have different executive directors, board presidents, we have different people within the organization tuning in. What can they do to equip them to be able to um, build a board process in the sense of what we're talking about? They may not know about it. They're on a call, they're listening in, oh, taking notes, like, oh yeah, that's good. But how can they take this further?
So I think that there's a few ways that leaders can take it further. You can, again, get additional training from the avenues that I had just mentioned. There's some
Mm-hmm.
really good, and of course, I'm about to say there's some good reading material that
Mm-hmm.
now I cannot think of like the names of them because it's
Yep.
just been
Yep.
that kind
Yep.
of week. But
Yeah.
there seek out different types of periodicals and material about board
Mm-hmm.
development and just being a better leader as well. And honestly,
Mm-hmm.
the biggest thing is that if you're in a nonprofit, meet with whoever it is in your leadership, even if you're the CEO or the executive director. But if you have another group that's kind of like under you or working with you, rather, talk to them about, well, do we have these areas, and do a check. Do you have a strategic plan? Do you have your board bylaws? Do you have an organizational articles of incorporation? Like, do you have these things? If the answer is no, then it's very likely that the board you'll be building is one that's going to have to deal with strategic ideas
Mm-hmm.
and activities. So it's almost like gathering a decision tree for what comes next. So, you're at your executive, you're the executive director, and now you're like, well, what's next? Is to find out what you need. So if you've got those things, then you don't necessarily need a strategic plan. But then I would tell you to go look in your strategic plan and figure out, well, what is the gap? Are you gapping in volunteers? Are you gapping in fundraising? Is there a specific type of fundraising that you're gapping in? Is it programmatic issues that you need to
Mm-hmm.
collectively come together for? And then maybe you can start building your board off of that, and start thinking about, like, how many people do you want on your board? And also, one other tidbit I will say is, it's okay if your board is small at first. You don't have to have 15, 20, 25 people in your board to
Mm-hmm.
start, especially being a new nonprofit or a younger nonprofit. If you do have them, then great. But don't feel that, like, oh, we can't get the work done with 5. You
Mm-hmm.
absolutely can get the work done with 5, but it has to be an intentional 5. It has to be an
Mm-hmm.
intentional in your activities. And that's honestly the same way if you had 5 or if you had 25. It has to be
Mm-hmm.
intentional work that everyone is doing and involved in. And they will feel really prepared themselves and excited to do the work if there's something to be done. So it's really
Mm-hmm.
figuring out, well, where's the gap and what kind of board do I want this to be? Is this a strategic board? Is this a volunteer board? Are we a fundraising board? Are we a programmatic board? Are we kind of all of the above? Then you have
Mm-hmm.
to kind of go with your priorities. And I will say, if you're all of the above, I would say strategic first, funding last. I know that sounds crazy because it's like, how can we do anything with any money? Because if you
Mm-hmm.
ask for money, people are going to expect results. And if you're not prepared capacity
Mm-hmm.
wise to give them those results, it's going to be, not great at the end. So,
Yep.
strategy first. Um, you can go with, volunteers and programs, however you want in that
Yeah.
order, but strategy first, funding last. When you're
Love it.
planning, you'll get there.
Love that. I love that. Yes. Because oftentimes what you hear is the request typically is fundraising first And
Yep.
then after,
Yep.
unfortunately, because you don't have the capacity, you have to go back and do
Yep.
all the strategy and all the
Playing
things in
catch up.
between. Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah, you're
That
playing
can,
catch up.
yeah, and it could hurt future opportunities because who knows if the funder is going to allow it come back later and fund you. So,
Absolutely. And
hmm
you don't want to hurt your reputation with that. So
yeah,
always plan. I tell my grant classes that 80% of it is planning and 20% of it is writing. And then it's the same, almost direction when it comes to just developing your board and the leaders for it is looking at strategically, who are you? Where are you
hmm
right now? Where do you want to be in the future? Sure. But where are you today? And
hmm
you plan for today so that you can get to tomorrow, but you look at where you're at right now and then where you want to be. And when you have the plans behind that, then you can put everything else in place.
Love it. It is always a great conversation with you,
Yeah.
and I definitely appreciate you coming back on. How can those listening in, if they want to just connect with you online or however, how can they stay connected?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn under Angela White Jones. I think you can do Angela Jones actually, comma PhD should be it, or even Angela Jones. I'm sure that my
hmm
face from UCF will pop in there at some point.
Okay.
So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place. Or you can reach me via email if you have any questions, which is angela.white, like the color, hyphen Jones, Jones, at ucf.edu. Send me an email if you have any questions and what your thoughts are, and I would love to answer them.
Awesome. Well, thank you once again for joining us. And thank you everyone for
Thank
tuning
you.
in, and we will see you for the next Nonprofit Enthusiast Live.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, Lasheena.
Bye.
Bye.
You're welcome. Thank you.